After spending 27 years in prison for fighting for freedom against apartheid in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was released from prison on February 11, 1990. 4 years later, in 1994, South Africa experienced its first democratic election, and Mandela was elected to the presidency. Today, our guest will focus on the significance of Mandela's leadership as president and his role in leading South Africa to a place of healing, hope, and justice. Stay tuned. Welcome to the show. I'm Karen Crozier, and I'm joined today by Carla Kirk, who is Director of African American Studies Program at Fresno City College, as well as Peter Smith, who is Assistant Professor of Center for Peacemaking and Conflict Studies at Fresno Pacific University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we have this conversation of looking at Mandela, we talked about in our part one who he was in dealing with apartheid in South Africa. Now, this man has risen to the presidency. What can we learn from Mandela as we look at the ways that he specifically modeled forgiveness and reconciliation instead of hatred and alienation or disrespect to the white people and what they had done to him? Let's begin with you, Peter.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think Mandela really did well when he took over as president was that he didn't, how to say this, Mandela stayed true to his vision. His vision was we need equality in South Africa. It hasn't worked to have whites dominating blacks, and it's not going to work to have blacks dominating whites. You can't build a society on that, and you can't build something positive. And so he stayed true to his vision, and I think this is what led him down the path of talking about forgiveness and reconciliation. Because if you don't go down that path, the other path that's open to you is the path of revenge and hatred and bitterness and this domination narrative. And so part of the genius of his leadership, I think, was this vision that he stayed true to, and the narrative that this is the kind of people we want to be. Look down the road here. This is where we're headed. This is important. And so I think in that sense too, what he had to say about forgiveness didn't ring hollow because he was living it, because he had gone through the things he had suffered, and was able to talk about forgiveness. So that can't be glib or flippant. That comes from a deep place, and I think people were able to respect that and begin to follow that lead, because that was leading with substance, moral substance.
Yes, because he could have easily had an all-black South African cabinet.
Totally.
But what did he do in forgiveness and reconciliation? Invited his former white oppressors to assume cabinet positions, as well as his jailers. Carla, what is your perspective on how Mandela led as president in the areas of forgiveness and reconciliation?
I think that the building of the cabinet that he assumed with his presidency was key, as Peter said, in showing that we're not just talking about peace and reconciliation and rebuilding our society and our nation, but we have to, kind of what we say in West Fresno, you can't just talk about it, you got to be about it. And that is what he demonstrated. If he had, it's not only that he could have had an all-black cabinet, he could have easily declared himself president for life. And I think that this is a trapping that other African nations, as they gained their independence from their colonial oppressors, one of the biggest issues that other African nations have had is that people get in power and they want to stay in power. And instead of going about nation building and rebuilding and reconciling your past, you get what Dr. Derek Smith calls just a darker oppressor. And Nelson Mandela did not take that route. He was very inclusive and said, if we're going to rebuild our nation, we must do it together. And I really see that as a model that he shaped for other world leaders. to say that you can't do this in a vengeful kind of way. You can't seize power and then say, I'm going to keep power. If what you want to do is rebuild your nation, if you want to build a stronger future for the generations that come after you, the ones that you don't even get to see, then you must lay this groundwork at your first opportunity to say that we are going to work together. We are going to build this nation together.
That's a critical point that you raised concerning nation building, because Mandela is attributed to one of the key people who was able to prevent a civil war in South Africa during the time when there was violence on every level that was taking place in the white-dominant South African government. Couldn't control it. And Mandela came on the scene after he was released from prison to speak to the people, and they responded. That is huge. That is huge for him to be able to speak into that space. But when we look at the role that he played and the ways that he modeled in his leadership as president, we also know of the flip side of those both white South Africans as well as black South Africans. What in the world are you doing, Mandela? Can you share some of the challenges that occur on all sides when we're talking about forgiveness and reconciliation? Carla, you care to?
I would say probably within the general population of South Africa, for those who are resistant to this idea of coming together, whether you be a black South African who says, listen, you did this to my grandfather and to my father and now to me, and I'm not going to forget what you did, and I can't find it in me to forgive what you've done to me and my family for generations. For white South Africans, it's hard to relinquish that privilege. It's hard to relinquish that power. It's hard to be equal when you've been so high, when equality means that you have to come down and for someone else to come up. And that's hard, I would say, in human nature. If you are accustomed to a certain way of life, a certain way of living, to, as a white South African, to be seen as giving that up, is to giving up what now you have seen as your rightful role as a South African. And so the challenges would be those who are not able to forgive and who are unwilling to forget.
Forgiving and forgetting. Do you consider those to be challenges to reconciliation and forgiveness?
Absolutely. I think we could bring in the word justice. That sometimes people feel like when you are called to forgive that you're somehow giving up on justice, and how can I forget my grandfather, my father, and what's been done to me? Sometimes is a justice kind of issue for people. And then so in that sense, it takes work to understand how justice and forgiveness actually kind of fit together and aren't exclusive. You don't have to choose one of those. And I think Mandela worked at that. One thing we haven't mentioned so far is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was happening kind of simultaneous with his presidency and so forth, and often is associated more with Desmond Tutu. But Mandela was in full support of it. And people can criticize and say, well, that didn't really do much, or not much happened. But I think it's a wonderful, again, an example of ways that we try to work at these things in forgiveness and reconciliation and unity and peacemaking. It's about setting a platform and making those things possible. But it maybe becomes like the old adage that we have with the folk wisdom: you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can lead people to the table, to the platform, invite them into this space for reconciliation and forgiveness and coming together, but they may not want to, and that's difficult. And so we continue to invite and to explain and to try to build understanding there. I think Mandela did that through his cabinet. We've also got the great story about how he did that by supporting the rugby team, right, which was a historical divide between who supports the rugby team. He said, we're all going to support the rugby team. Some people would say that's just good political savvy. Again, I think it was partly that and partly his moral fortitude, I think, to be magnanimous and to make that kind of gesture and say, this is good for all of us. We're going to do it.
Yeah, you made mention of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and his book that came out of his leadership in the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions was No Future Without Forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so he was very much so committed to the ongoing work that was necessary for nation building that you raised, Carla, in support of what Mandela's leadership was bringing. But another component that I think that was significant around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and you let me know what you all think, is that for those South Africans, black South Africans that were oppressed, that experienced the generational injustice, they finally got the opportunity to share their story. They finally got the opportunity to unleash what had been dismissed by a government that didn't care before that time. So what do we consider about the power of narrative for those who have been experienced generations of injustice by governments and forgiveness and reconciliation?
I think initially it's the validation that comes with having a voice.
Yeah.
You have been kept quiet, and what you may need is for someone to hear you when you have been unheard and unseen for generations, to come forward and just to have that kind of release. This is what was done to me. This is what was done to my mother. This is what has been done to my family. And not that I want to now do this to you, but you need to hear and recognize that this is what I have been through, and I am a human and I am valid. And to have your voice, your narrative, as something, almost as part of the official record of how we're going to begin to rebuild our nation, is very empowering to the people.
Peter, what is your perspective?
Carla hit it right on. Validation is really the main one there. But yeah, I think this the other word to key on is narrative, as you did as well. Someone has said that forgiveness is learning to tell a new narrative. And that's one of the reasons why we need a chance to have our voice heard and so forth, so that we are storytelling people and informed by stories as humans. That's just who we are, how we make meaning out of the world, right? And some people get stuck in certain stories. You get stuck in a story of being the victim, stuck in a story of being oppressed, stuck in a story of not being heard. And when you can actually begin to be heard, you might be able to then tell a new story about how, yeah, that's how it was, and now I'm this kind of person, I'm becoming this kind of person. It again opens up space and unlocks possibilities, and possibilities for new stories to be told. Yeah.
Great. We're going to take a break at this time, and we'll be back in a minute.
KNXT thanks all its loyal viewers and respected businesses who have supported your Catholic television station. Now you can support KNXT with program underwriting by having your name, your company's name, or organization associated with your favorite program. Detailed information about you or your company will appear before and after each program or day part you select. Keep the quality and spiritual message alive and make a difference. Call 559-488-7440 today or go online at knxt.tv to find out more about program underwriting on KNXT.
Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about Nelson Mandela's life and legacy beyond his presidency. And today I'm joined by Carla Kirk from Fresno City College and Peter Smith from Fresno Pacific University. As we look at the 21st century, and Mandela became president in 1994, and we have talked about the way that he led with his moral leadership of forgiveness and reconciliation, of reaching out to those who were the white oppressors, and the ways that he built a nation. What do you think today are the lasting impact of Mandela's leadership and legacy in South Africa and beyond? Let's begin with you, Carla.
I think his lasting legacy is the optimistic power of hope that things will get better. I think that he has been an inspiration not just for South Africans, white South Africans and black South Africans, but a model for the world. Even our own president has been greatly influenced by Nelson Mandela and his life and his works and what he has done for the idea that you can overcome your history, that you are not defined by the past, and that's a valuable lesson that we can learn here in the United States of America. And while there are still issues, there are still concerns that are facing the South African people, you have to understand that the system of apartheid was in place for more than a century, just as apartheid, but as a colonial, dealing with colonialism in South Africa had gone back much, much further. And so these systems have been in place for centuries. And so you can't expect them to be completely corrected in 20 years. It may take another century. And we as contemporary humans really need to get our head around the idea of time and space, and that the system didn't happen immediately, it didn't build immediately, and it's not going to be dismantled immediately, but the important thing is to believe in the goal and what the goals were and to remain optimistic that if we keep going, if we do keep trying this way, if there are 100 people who are starving and this year we feed 10, next year we feed 20, well, it's 20 less people who are starving, and you don't discount that for the 80 people that you haven't gotten to yet. It's going to take time.
Yeah, so Peter, what is your perspective? Thank you, Carla.
Yeah, great thoughts. I think along with that, what Mandela's leadership and example calls us to is a couple of things. One, as great as he was as a leader and as a politician and so forth, we ought not to sit around and wait for leaders to do it for us. And so it's maybe a call to others of us to get involved. And so people could begin to criticize now and say, well, South Africa isn't going up or down. When I was living in Southern Africa, they talked about South Africa was going sideways. They couldn't tell whether it was improving or, we just talked about going sideways. And they would, maybe criticize and lay that at Nelson Mandela's feet. Something failed in his leadership. Well, I think that's a false charge to put there, because not one person can do it all, right? And so we all need to get involved and figure out how we can contribute to making things go those directions. So that's part of, I think, his impact is calling us to, what are you going to do to roll up your sleeves and get involved in making your society better?
Right, because he became president in his 70s.
Yeah.
Right? So if we become confused in this country and we thinking that you're too old, so that is a lasting impact, in my opinion, that, in Carla, your point, rethinking time and space and even age, right? What type of leadership does it really take to think about a long-term experience in this process of nation building? And let's talk about the people who were also not mentioned as major icons, such as his wife, Winnie Mandela, and others that were Walter Sisulu. Any comments you want to share there of the people who walked alongside him? Carla?
I think overshadowed quite often in America, and as we study the legacy of South Africa, is the role that Winnie Mandela played, not just during her political career, but the role that she played as a mother to their children, as a centralizing force, as the force that kept things going in Nelson Mandela's absence. And that has been a traditional trait of African women throughout time, is that African women have never been women who sit on the side and wait for their husband to take care of it. African women will step up and they will take their responsibility very seriously. It's something that we saw similarly here in the United States during the Civil Rights era, that while we remember the men who gave the speeches, what we don't remember are the women who packed the lunches, who organized, who got out and made sure that people were coming. We often overlook the very central role that women play in organizing in social justice.
What do you think, Peter, about the people who also were alongside Mandela and even the organization, the ANC, because they were in there with him too in prison?
That's right.
And so it was like this ongoing solidarity. What are your thoughts?
Well, it brings up a great point, because as great as it is to have this show and to think about Nelson Mandela and so forth, sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when we hold up these heroes and make them, these are such great men, great people, and forget about the people that are around them, and that people don't become great and take on heroic roles and do the kinds of things that they do without support of various kinds, and without being formed by people and shaped by teachers, mothers, aunts, along the way, friends, and so we need to sometimes back away from the hero worship, as it were, and remember that people are part of social communities, and that those communities are important as well. So yeah, his fellow prisoners, we can name some of them, like you said, Sisulu and others, and study ought to be given to them. We ought to give some time to them as well, as in terms of what they've done.
Right, and the role of the women in that process. It has recently come to my knowledge that during the Education Act, the Bantu Education Act that took place back in 1953 in South Africa, it was the women who resisted. They were the most organized in that process to say, you're not going to give us separate education. You're not going to control what we can learn, because it only became, you're only going to learn so much. And did not provide them with this comparable education that the white South African students were receiving. And so we cannot forget about the women and the role that they play in that process. So as we've been talking about multiple concepts of forgiveness, reconciliation, as well as peacemaking, and what roles, how can we make these connections to our students as educators? How do we challenge them in this process? Carla, you want to share?
Yeah, the first thing that I do with my students is educate them about a history that they have been kept from. To understand that even though the continent of Africa is far away, it is very close to who we are as African American, and is to our benefit and to our betterment to understand our connection to the continent. A second thing that I remind them of is to look at the pictures from that time and look who that is protesting and arguing and standing up for what they believe in. I tell them that's young people like you. That's not old people like me. It's young people like you college-age students. It is incumbent upon you to lead, to continue this fight, to continue this struggle that we have been taking on now for a century. So now it is your turn to pick up this mantle and carry it forward. We have to give them a sense of responsibility, a sense of connection to this history, to say that, oppression only stops as you fight against it. When you stop fighting against oppression, it comes right back on you. And so I really try to charge them with the responsibility to carry these missions forward.
Thank you. Peter, how do you educate in those terms?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll return to my theme I was talking about a second ago in terms of heroes and so forth. I don't know that Mandela set out to be a heroic figure. I don't know that many of our great leaders ever do. And so in one sense, when we teach with heroic people in the classroom, we hold them up as examples, and in some ways the implied message is, okay, students, you go and be heroic like those people. And that's good and well to a certain extent. But I'm not sure that's how you arrive at taking heroic, strong moral action. I think, again, if we go back to Mandela, he was convinced by a vision of equality, that the injustice that he saw was not right, and that needed to be fought against, but not just against, but you can't just be against something, you've got to be for something. And so he gave people, this is something we can be for, we can build this, right? So I think trying to educate students in, well, what's your vision, and what are you committed to? And are your commitments enough to take you in a direction for a long time, for the change of society? We've got this instant society where we want everything now. If I just send a text message, I hope something's going to happen immediately. But no, we need a longer vision, because change is going to take time.
Right, so when we continue on this educational line, I'm asking you to fill in the blank, beginning with you, Peter. Okay. Nelson Mandela has inspired me to, because why? What has Nelson Mandela inspired you to?
He's inspired me to think about the people that I'm working with, that perhaps they are the next Nelson Mandela. I don't know that I'm called to that kind of heroic action and leadership, but what if the people that I work with, students, colleagues, are called to that, to some sort of leadership position that is bigger than they can ever imagine. What role might I play in helping prepare them for that? Being part of that community around somebody. That's very important too. And so I feel that that's an important thing that Nelson Mandela makes me think about as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Carla. Nelson Mandela has inspired you too, because
Nelson Mandela has inspired me to do my very best, because I don't know where this road will take me, but I have to remain committed to walking down it. So when there's something that you believe in so much that you are not willing, but you can accept that you must sacrifice your freedom, your family, the experience of raising your children, just a peaceful kind of normal life that most of us just kind of live, to know that when you are called to greatness that you must stand to it. And that's what I carry with me.
Great. Well, thank you both for being on the show today. If you missed any part of the show, you can catch it online at knxt.tv and click on the YouTube icon. Thank you for watching today. Take care and God bless.